There's a kind of injury that often goes unseen. If someone you love breaks a leg, people rush in with casseroles and crutches and understanding. But if they have a brain injury from a car crash, a fall, a concussion, the outside might look fine while everything inside has changed. Maybe you're caring for someone who forgets things they used to remember easily, gets overwhelmed by noise or light, can't tolerate screens anymore, or seems like their personality has shifted. You might be wondering, is this the injury? Is this them? Is it me? And you're trying to hold your own life together at the same time. Today's episode is for you if you're living in that confusing middle ground after a traumatic brain injury, as a survivor, a partner, a parent, or a friend. My guest is Kelly Tuttle, a neurology nurse practitioner who joined what she calls the Head Injury Survivors Club after a car accident in 2015. 3 months later, she realized something was seriously wrong, and that was the beginning of a long journey of brain healing and self-discovery. Now, she sits across from patients and families every day who are going through the same thing, and she shares practical tools and a steady message of hope. I got better, you can too. Kelly, welcome to Radiant Moments.
Thank you. I love that intro.
Kelly, before we get into strategies and brain science, I'd like to honor the journey that brought you here. Would you be willing to start by sharing some of your story?
Definitely. So, my story starts with the thunderous clap of metal and the shattering of glass, people leaving their homes to see what had happened, and the encroaching sounds of sirens approaching. And I had been driving down a rural road, and another driver pulled out in front of me, and I was unable to stop in time before T-boned. I shook off the crash and thought I would be okay and be able to get back into life. In fact, I went to work the next day. But I work with nurse practitioners and registered nurses, and they noticed right away something was wrong. I wasn't acting right. I wasn't speaking right. So they encouraged me to see my general practitioner the next day, which I did. And I was diagnosed with a concussion, taken off work for 2 weeks, and I left with the impression that I would be fine after 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks, I go back to work and I push, push, push. I'm a mother of young children. I'm working full time. I have over an hour commute one way. And despite the symptoms of irritability, a terrible neck pain, headaches, and fatigue, I continued to push through until one day when I was driving home, I fell asleep at the wheel. And it was my car bouncing off the road that woke me up just in time to prevent my car from colliding with a tree. And this is how well my brain was working, caregivers. I decided not to mention this to my husband or my doctor. Decided I would just take a nap on the side of the road and I would keep pushing. And fortunately, I had lunch with a colleague. At the time, I was a cardiology nurse practitioner. My colleague was a neurology nurse practitioner. We had lunch and she asked me how I was doing. She was curious about my recovery. And I explained I had these symptoms, and then the other day I fell asleep at the wheel. But that's okay because I'm taking this nap in between on the side of the road, which I don't recommend to your listeners. And she said, "No, Kelly, that's not all right. You need to see a physical medicine rehab doctor." I was like, "What's that?" And she's like, "Well, they used to be physiatrists, and they treat brain injuries and spinal injuries, and you need to get a brain scan." I hadn't had any of that. So I go to my doctor and I really had to jump through some loops. And I finally got the referral to see the physical medicine rehab doctor. And after seeing her, she recognized right away something was off. She took me off work for 3 months. And that's when I started getting on to the right road of recovery. Fast forward to 2 weeks before I have to return to work, I'm freaking out, Michelle. I'm freaking out because I don't know what my brain needs for me to be a safe nurse practitioner at work. And I went through all my handouts, the websites, the books, and just couldn't find specific tools that I could use immediately. And my reading ability at the time was diminished to about 5 or 10 minutes in my screen time. So if I pushed it further than that, I would start forgetting what I was reading. I would start having headaches and dizziness and exhaustion. So my time was limited in absorbing that information. So down the road, a friend mentions, "Why don't you write a book about your recovery?" And I said, "Oh, wow, yeah, that's a good idea." So I decided to write a book. I'm going to make this short, not long. And I decide that this book is going to be specific to the brain injury survivor who wants to go back to work. And it will have strategies and tools that can be implemented right away to support your brain's performance at work. And I wanted to be short and easy to read. And I also put it on Audible for brain injury survivors who are having difficulty with reading until they get better. And so that's my story, and it's continued to blossom from there. I thought the book would be the end. No,
It's kept going.
it's kept going. And now I have a podcast.
That's fantastic. You've called it joining the Head Injury Survivors Club. What did life feel like in that early season, the things other people might not have seen, but you were living with every single day?
A multitude of things, but the biggest one that was paramount was the fatigue, the neuro fatigue. So neuro fatigue is different from regular fatigue, is fatigue that's brought on by minimal activity or a small task and is not responsive to rest and sleep. It just persists. So a brain injury survivor, and that could be someone like me who's had a traumatic brain injury or a stroke survivor, could end up having neuro fatigue. And no matter how well they sleep, the quality of the sleep, they'll still wake up tired. And then they'll only have so much energy throughout that day. And then they're done. And when I mean done, like me, fall asleep at the wheel, not be able to walk, not be able to talk. It's serious. And it shouldn't be ignored or dismissed. So what people didn't see the first 2 years, that in order for me to go to work, what I would have to do is I would wake up in the morning and I would go to work, and on my lunch break, I would sleep in my car. And then after the end of the day, I would drive home and I would take a 2-hour nap. I would wake up for an hour to prep for the next day, and I'd go to sleep for the rest of the night. I did that for the first 2 years, and I lost time with my family and my friends. But I had to do that because I was the main income earner and benefit earner for our family. So it was really important for me to do that. And then on the weekends, I would sleep 12, 14 hours,
Because your brain was just exhausted.
just exhausted.
And not like more work than you would normally have to do, just from day-to-day tasks that became debilitating almost in having to readjust your entire day to be around how to cope, how to be awake enough or have enough brain capacity to keep doing each of the tasks that needed to be done. Was there a particular moment or a turning point where you thought, okay, this is my brain now. I need to figure out how to live and heal in this new reality?
Yes, I was. And I don't know what prompted it, to tell you the truth. I decided to go out and journal on my deck. I did start journaling about 6 weeks after my injury. And so I went out to my deck and I started thinking some of these deficits that I have, these challenges, I think they're going to stay around for a little bit. This is about a year into it. And so for some reason, I decided to write on the left side of the piece of paper, I drew a line down the middle of the things that I was passionate about, all the goals and plans I had before my brain injury. And on the right side of the paper, I wrote all the things I gained from my brain injury. And then I compared the two and I looked back to my goals and passions, and I realized that my values and my passions had changed. And so the goals I had were no longer important to me. And most of everything I crossed off the list. And then I looked at the side where I wrote the things that I gained: compassion, empathy, patience, more present living, more slower paced living, more gratitude. I started liking the person I was becoming. And I think with letting go of who I used to be and embracing what I was becoming really helped with that grieving process that occurs when you have a brain injury, that loss of whatever your energy or your ability to read or your memory. I think it really helped with that transition. Now, I'm not saying let go of your old self or get over it. I am not saying that. I am saying, though, that you should take your old self, because that's your foundation that you have, and then add on what you have gained from your brain injury onto that and discover the person you're becoming.
I can imagine many people listening really recognize parts of their story in your story and their loved one's story if they are a carer in what you've just described. And I want to say thank you and honor you for sharing that so openly with us. I know at times sharing those raw moments can be very hard and triggering for someone who's a survivor. A lot of carers and even survivors themselves tell me I don't have the words for what is happening inside my brain or what I'm seeing day to day. On the outside, it might look like forgetfulness or mood swings or emotional mental changes for anxiety, depression, image in themselves. But on the inside, it can really feel like fog or chaos for the person who's experienced that. I'd love to give our listeners some language for what brain injury can really look like day to day from both your lived experience and your work as a neurology nurse practitioner. What are some of the most common symptoms you see after a traumatic brain injury, especially the ones people might dismiss or completely misunderstand?
Well, there's so many symptoms, but sensory overload is very common. And what the caregiver needs to understand is that the person is not intentionally forgetting things. They don't intentionally snap at you. In fact, there was a time where I was trying to pay the bills and my husband was talking to me at the same time, and I just wanted to kill him at that moment. So I snapped. I said, "I'm paying the bills," or something really unlike me. I'm pretty easygoing. And I just kind of looked at him and I just said, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. That was my brain talking. That wasn't me." And I have found that it's really helped with my family. If I do get irritable, letting them know that my brain is getting overwhelmed and I need to focus on this and then I'll talk to you later. And then it got to the point where my family recognized it. Like one of my kids will say, "Oh, mama, I'm making you multitask. I'm sorry. Let me talk to you after you're done with that." So it's very important for that clear communication and to not take the behavior personally, because your survivor loves you and they're doing their best, and their behavior or they're forgetting something that you've told them 3 times is not intentional. It's just the way the brain works. And there are personality changes too. I had a big personality change. I used to be goal driven, lots of energy. I didn't have time for makeup, do your hair, just t-shirt and jeans kind of gal, out the door, on the go. And then after my brain injury, I got obsessed with makeup and hair and fashion. So I switched like from left to right brain personality. And I wanted to stay home and just sit on my deck and watch the birds flit through the trees. So, yeah, those issues are real and they do happen.
Did you find that with the sensory overload, things like light, sound, textures, tastes, and smells became to a point where you have to completely change where you are or what you're doing to soothe your brain in those moments? It's something that I've noticed as a carer of someone with a brain injury that went through the roof with sensory input, and still today is a challenge for them to be able to manage those inputs. Is that something that you have seen as a nurse practitioner and as a survivor?
Yes, definitely. And anytime that you have a brain injury symptom manifest, whether your loved one is complaining of headaches or dizziness or is becoming irritable, that is the brain communicating to the survivor and the caregiver that their brain is getting overwhelmed. And that's when you need to stop, slow down, and take a break and rest. For sound sensitivity, you really want to make sure that conversations are quieter, not so loud. You want to not have the TV or the radio on constantly. At work, I recommend my patients and myself, I use noise counseling technology so I can improve my focus and attention. And I would use earbuds, noise counseling earbuds. And I would place my headphones on top of those with noise counseling technology, and then even pipe relaxing music on that. So that's how sensitive it was. And I could still hear people talking. That's one of the techniques that you can utilize. Making sure that you get lots of rest, 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night, and will help fortify your brain to be able to cope with sensory input during the day. And for light sensitivity, minimize screen time, especially if you're trying to work. Like when I was working, I saved all my screen time for work because I did charting on a computer. I had a company iPhone. So at home, I didn't watch TV and I didn't flip through my phone endlessly through social media. I really put that on hold so that I could be the best for my patients the next day. You can dim the light on your devices. You can increase the contrast of the texture of your devices. It's all under accessibility, under settings. You can increase the text size so that you don't spend so much energy having to focus on the text. It's easier to read. I wore dark glasses at work. They had fluorescent lights. They were horrible, just horrible, so bright. I just wanted to die. I felt like a vampire in the sunlight. And so I would wear dark glasses. Sometimes I'd wear a hat. I put up fluorescent light blocking covers on the fluorescent light. And I also took a camping umbrella into work and I clamped it to my desk. And so it was over me and my computer, and that helped a lot. But finally, I did ask for a work accommodation to have those lights turned off.
It's wonderful. And I guess that's part of the journey, is working out and being confident to ask for those accommodations, for assistance, for acknowledgement that I'm struggling with this, not to feel ashamed or embarrassed, not to have any degree of distress over needing something to support you to thrive. I know that there is lots of misunderstandings when it comes to brain injuries. Can we talk about what are some of the biggest misunderstandings you see around traumatic brain injuries, either for the person who's injured, the family, or even from parts of the medical system as a nurse practitioner?
One of the misconceptions is that after a certain period that the brain injury is just an acute incident, an acute injury. And what we're finding with research is that it's not that. In fact, they have found in some research that there's neuroinflammation in the brain after a brain injury up to 12 years after the brain injury. So there is a change in perception that a head injury is not just this acute time period of an incident in the person's life, but yet a more of a chronic illness, and a chronic illness that needs continual support, therapy, and treatment. That's amongst the brain injury specialists and people passionate about brain injuries, but you don't see that knowledge on the front line. So it's not just a one-time thing, it's permanent. And they can't get over it. I've heard people say, just get over it. You look fine. I don't understand why you're tired or why you don't want to go to this party. They can't get over it. It's invisible. But now we're finding research that shows that, yeah, this is not an acute issue, it's a persistent issue.
12 years is a long time to not be recognized, to be a survivor or a carer advocating on the front lines to get support for a longer period of time, because you're right. Your speech is better, your physicality is better, you're functioning. I've personally heard, why aren't you back full time? Nothing wrong with you. They say that you're 100%. You should be back doing everything as it was. And as a carer and somebody who's seen what happens with brain injuries, that small piece of dismissal has such an impact on the person that we love, the person that has gone through this traumatic experience. And it is traumatic. Doesn't matter what has happened in your brain. That's scary, to have an operation on your brain, to have swelling, to not feel like yourself, to be in a situation where you have no control and all of the things that you knew before are all different, or there are a large portion that feel different and that you feel on an ongoing basis. And that dismissal has damages to the person that you're caring for, the person who's experienced it, but also for the carer. Because then where do you go? If nobody is listening to this is still happening, nobody has access to the research in the front lines, or they're not doing more to investigate and to actually hear what the person has to say, that piece of information, that research has shown that it can be 12 years post an injury and possibly longer. and that it is chronic. It's not acute. It doesn't happen quickly. It's a long-term experience. That piece of information for my listeners who have people who've had strokes, accidents, sudden brain injuries that come out of nowhere, like aneurysms bursting, the sigh of relief to hear, I'm not going crazy. I still
Yes.
feel this way, and it's okay for me to feel this way, and that there should be further accommodations, further research, and more invested into the long-term success of brain injury sufferers. So for caregivers or families listening who think, because sometimes this happens, is this just them being difficult right now? Are they being lazy? They're not trying hard enough? What would you want them to know about what can be happening inside a healing brain?
Well, I guess the saying goes, and I've always used this in my practice with my patients, is to understand before you are understood. Well, I'll use my personal example. I did not pay my bills, and I that was so overwhelmed with them and the planning and figuring out what money was coming in and what money I had because of being on disability and waiting for checks to come in and not sure how much they were going to be. It was too overwhelming. And I told my speech therapist about being overwhelmed, not being able to pay my bills. And she was able to go, oh, well, what it is that you need to take the task and you need to break it down into small steps. So, for example, you would take your mail and you would separate junk mail, important mail, and bills. And then the next step would be open the envelopes, blah, 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 going down the list of very tiny steps. So, when your brain injury survivor is doing something that is not safe or not good, or forgets, or you told them to go make their bed and they haven't done it, instead of going, I told you to do that, you haven't done it, and you're lazy, say, hey, I just asked you 8:30 this morning for you to make your bed. I see that it's still not made. Do you know why? And trying to pull out of the person the barriers that it is to make that bed. And it could be, just like an example, what I said, the task was overwhelming. They walked in the room, and on the floor, there was a bunch of dirty laundry, and then there was the bed. And they stood there frozen, not knowing what to do first.
Mhm.
And if you break that task or you get that information, you can break the task down and start working with the creating strategies and tools that will support that person to be able to manage keeping their room cleaned. It's that communication. And for survivors, it's always recommend journaling to understand your symptoms. You need to journal them. And you need to pay attention to what makes them better, what makes them worse, what strategies have helped and what hasn't. For example, if I had a conversation I was uncomfortable with at someone at work, I would step back and analyze that conversation, and I would decide, okay, why was I irritable? Well, maybe they broke my intention and I was getting tired and I really should have taken a break 15 minutes prior to having this conversation with the person.
Mhm.
And then next time when I have this conversation with this person that was frustrating, this is what I'm going to say in the future. And I write this script down and I would put it in my journal. And then at work, I would review the script intermittently to remember that. So when that conversation came back up, I had my script ready to say that was more professional, and not so snippy.
So giving yourself nuggets of gold so that you could be in a better place. You felt supported and you had access to the words so that you didn't have to keep them in your memory bank that wasn't at its peak performance during that recovery period. That's a brilliant way of using journaling to support yourself in that space. And I guess when we look at those ways of self-empowerment, being that you have not only lived it, but you also are on the medical side as well. How did your personal experience change the way you listen to and support traumatic brain injury patients and their families? What's changed?
Well, of course, a deeper understanding. And I really felt like I really transitioned into a role of being an ambassador for people who had brain injuries, but also who had mild cognitive impairment. So, patients with Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, I could listen to what they were saying and I would say, oh, you have difficulty with your word finding. And they're just, that's it. That's exactly it. Or I'll say, you have brain fog, or it sounds like you got irritable in that conversation because the person was talking to you while the TV was on. So you have like hearing overload or sensory overload. So make sure the TV's off when you have conversations. And they just like, oh my gosh, you get it. And then I can explain, hey, the reason why you're having these issues is because you have an energy deficit, and processes in the brain take energy to run, and the brain likes to run efficiently. If it doesn't run efficiently, then it burns a lot of energy. So the brain already uses 20% of your energy. That's just your healthy person. When you have a brain injury, actions are damaged, cells die. So the brain is fascinating the way it will rewire, it'll recreate ways to get around the area that has been damaged and create new pathways to do the same thing. Those new pathways are great, but it's like taking side streets as opposed to the freeway. So if you take the freeway, it's easy, it's fast. You use very little gas as opposed if you went and took the side streets. When you have a brain injury and you're recovering, you're constantly using side streets and you're improving the use of your side streets. And once you get the side streets down, then you travel a little bit faster, but you're still on side street and you're still using a lot of energy. And so you're going to have difficulties with processes and fueling them. It takes a lot of energy to fuel the executive functions in the frontal lobe, such as planning, motivation, math, speaking, memory. All that is processed up here in the frontal lobe. And it takes a lot of energy. And if your brain doesn't have energy, it's not going to fuel that part of your brain. It's going to spend its energy cleaning out the debris and creating new connections.
We're going to pause this conversation here. In the next episode, Kelly and I move into the practical, how to support a healing brain day to day, navigate doctors, and rebuild a life that still feels full and meaningful after a traumatic brain injury.